The reading should not have been there. Liaison Inspector Drethavar Sonn of the Vailith Administrative Authority stood at the secondary monitoring station on Junction Keth 9 and stared at a number that had no right to occupy his screen. He had processed 11,000 junction inspections across 42 Vailith administrative sectors in his career, and in every single one of them, the readings conformed. They sat within parameters. They belonged to categories. They obeyed the architecture of a classification system the Vailith had refined over 600 years of careful, methodical, utterly certain governance. This one did not. The number itself was small. Displayed in the lower diagnostic quadrant as a dimensionless coefficient of 0.0073, it was a waste heat reading from the junction's atmospheric recycling stack. Routine. The kind of number Drethavar's eyes would pass over during a quarterly audit without his pulse changing by a single beat. Except the coefficient carried a suffix the monitoring system had generated autonomously, a 3-character tag Drethavar had never encountered in any taxonomy manual, any training guide, any administrative circular in his entire career. The tag read NDF. Not a standard designator, not an abbreviation he recognized. The system had produced it the way a body produces a fever without permission in response to something wrong happening beneath the surface. Drethavar tapped the tag with one claw. The system expanded it into a full designation line, an non-derivable function, and beneath that, rendered in the typeface, the system reserved for conditions it could not reconcile with its own operational architecture. Source cannot be mapped to any installed process. He closed the expansion, opened it again, the designation held. Junction Keth 9 was a Vailith administrative way station, one of 412 identical structures along the Kethri corridor. Each served as a regulatory checkpoint for interstellar freight, crew rotation, and enforcement of the Vailith Commercial Compliance Code. Built by Vailith engineers, maintained by Vailith technicians, and administered by Vailith inspectors like Drethavar, the junction was one of the most thoroughly categorized structures in the known administrative hierarchy. Every pipe, duct, conduit, and atmospheric processor had a serial number, a maintenance schedule, and a compliance rating. Every reading from every sensor fed into a classification engine that the Vailith had been refining since before humanity had achieved interstellar travel. NDF meant the classification engine had found a reading it could not trace to any known source. Not a malfunction, because there were 419 subcategories of malfunction. Not a sensor error, because there were 83 codes for sensor drift alone. NDF meant the reading was real, verified, and utterly without origin. Central, this is Inspector Sonn at Keth 9 Secondary Monitoring. I have an NDF tag on the atmospheric recycling stack, waste heat coefficient 0.0073 with a non-derivable function suffix, requesting classification guidance. The pause on the channel lasted 4 seconds longer than standard protocol allowed. Inspector Sonn, Central acknowledges. Stand by for Specialist Dispatch. Specialist Dispatch. Drethavar's crest plates, narrow and gray and aligned with decades of administrative precision, shifted half a degree toward irritation. For a waste heat reading. The NDF designation triggers automatic specialist routing per Administrative Directive 7741. A human anomaly specialist has been assigned. Estimated arrival, 42 minutes. A human. Drethavar set his datapad on the console with the controlled placement of someone who held strong opinions about this arrangement, but intended to express them through posture rather than words. The Vailith Administrative Authority employed 11 human anomaly specialists across its entire network. 11. Out of a workforce of 900,000. They were contracted personnel, not Vailith, not credentialed through the authority's own examination system, not trained in the protocols that governed every aspect of junction operation. They were brought in because the authorities' own legal framework required an anomaly specialist for NDF designations, and the only species that reliably produced anomaly specialists was humanity. Drethavar considered this a design flaw in the universe. He pulled up the station's operational status while he waited. Everything normal. Atmospheric composition within parameters. Power grid stable. Freight processing on schedule. Crew complement at standard staffing. The only abnormality in the entire junction was a waste heat coefficient with a 3-character tag that shouldn't exist, pulsing quietly on his secondary screen like a small amber heartbeat. He ran the reading again. Same result. NDF, non-derivable function, source cannot be mapped. He ran it a third time, adjusting the sensor calibration by 0.002%, the maximum allowable adjustment without filing a recalibration request. Same result. The reading was stubborn. It sat on his screen like an uninvited guest at a formal dinner, refusing to explain itself, refusing to leave, refusing to be anything other than exactly what it was. 38 minutes passed. During that time, Drethavar completed 2 scheduled compliance audits, filed a maintenance deferral for a faulty lighting panel on Corridor 7, and ate a nutrient bar with the methodical efficiency of someone who viewed meals as administrative tasks. The NDF tag pulsed on his secondary screen throughout, patient and unyielding. The human arrived on the supply shuttle from Junction Keth 7, 2 stops down the corridor. She stepped off the shuttle ramp carrying a worn equipment case and a thermos of something that smelled like burned plant matter. She was shorter than Drethavar by a full head height, broader through the shoulders than any Valeth, and she moved with the unhurried confidence of someone who had seen enough strange things that one more barely registered. "Inspector Sonn," she extended a hand, a human greeting gesture Drethavar had never grown comfortable with. He touched it briefly with 2 claws, the minimum socially required contact. "Specialist." Patel, Rina Patel, Anomaly Response Kethri Corridor Division. She set her case on the deck and looked at the monitoring station. "You have an NDF. Waste heat coefficient atmospheric recycling stack. The reading is 0.0073 with a non-derivable function suffix. I have verified it 3 times. The sensor calibration is within tolerance. I have no explanation for the designation. That's why they send me." She opened the case. Inside, arranged with a precision that surprised Drethavar, he had expected human disorganization, were diagnostic instruments, data links, a handheld spectrometer, and several tools he did not recognize. When did the reading first appear? 1400 hours station time, approximately 90 minutes ago. Anything change at 1400? Shift rotation, freight arrival, system maintenance. No, the station was in standard operational mode. Nothing changed. Something changed. Readings don't appear from nowhere. She pulled up the waste heat data on his console and expanded the display. Her fingers moved across the interface with a familiarity that annoyed Drethavar. This was his station, his console, his jurisdiction. There. The coefficient started rising at 1347. Gradual increase over 13 minutes before the NDF threshold was reached and the system tagged it. Whatever caused this, it started small. Drethavar examined the timeline she had highlighted. She was right. The increase was there, subtle, hidden in the normal fluctuation band, easy to miss if you weren't specifically looking for it. He had not been looking for it. The atmospheric recycling stack processes waste heat from 17 systems, he said. Any one of them could contribute a marginal increase. A marginal increase wouldn't trigger NDF. The system tags NDF when the source of a reading can't be attributed to any installed process. Your 17 systems are all installed processes. The classification engine knows every one of them. It can account for every watt of waste heat they produce. This reading is coming from somewhere else. There is no somewhere else. The recycling stack processes waste heat from 17 systems. Those are the only systems connected to it. Patel looked at him with the expression humans used when they were about to say something the other person would not enjoy hearing. Then something is connected to your stack that isn't on your schematic. The words landed with a weight Drethavar felt in his crest plates, something not on the schematic. In a Valith administrative junction, where every component was documented, numbered, and filed in triplicate, the suggestion that something existed outside the official record was not merely unusual. It was an affront to every principle the administrative authority was built upon. That is not possible. The reading says it's not only possible, it's happening. She picked up the spectrometer. I need access to the recycling stack, physical access. The recycling stack is in the maintenance sublevel. Access requires a junction-level authorization code, which you have, which I am not inclined to issue to a contracted specialist for a waste heat anomaly that may well be an instrumentation artifact. Patel set the spectrometer down. She looked at Drethavar with an expression he would later classify, upon reflection, as patience, but a particular kind of patience, the kind that had clearly defined limits and knew exactly where they were. Inspector Sonn, you called Central. Central sent me. I am here because your classification engine produced a designation that means something on this station is doing something your system can't explain. That is my job, the things your system can't explain. I need to look at the recycling stack. You can come with me and maintain full jurisdiction, or you can stay here and watch the NDF tag blink until something breaks. Your choice. Drethavar's crest plates went flat. A Valith expression of controlled displeasure that, in administrative circles, was considered roughly equivalent to a strongly worded memorandum. He issued the authorization code. The maintenance sublevel of Junction Keth 9 was a utilitarian space, low ceilings, exposed conduit runs, and the steady hum of atmospheric processors doing the invisible work of keeping 743 station occupants breathing. The recycling stack occupied a central alcove, a vertical column of heat exchangers, condensation traps, and thermal regulators that processed waste heat from every major system on the station and converted it to supplemental energy for the lighting grid. Patel moved through the space with her spectrometer raised, scanning in slow, methodical sweeps. Drethavar followed, datapad in hand, documenting the inspection per protocol, because even an intrusion into his orderly world required proper documentation. Here, Patel stopped at the base of the recycling stack, where the primary intake manifold connected to the main thermal conduit. She pointed at a junction box, a sealed panel where 3 conduit lines converged before entering the stack. The reading is strongest at this junction. That junction connects thermal conduits from the power grid, the atmospheric processors, and the freight bay heating system, all documented, all installed. Patel opened the junction box. Inside, the 3 conduit lines were exactly where the schematic said they would be, labeled, color-coded, compliant. But between the second and third conduit, in a gap that should have contained nothing but insulated casing and structural support, there was something else. A 4th line. Thin, barely the diameter of Drethavar's smallest claw, with the dull gray finish of standard station conduit that explained why nobody had noticed it during routine visual inspections. It ran along the inside wall of the junction box, following the path of the 3rd conduit so closely that it appeared to be part of it. Without the spectrometer's thermal imaging, it was nearly invisible. But the spectrometer showed it with merciless clarity, a distinct thermal signature, carrying waste heat that did not originate from any of the 3 documented systems. There's your non-derivable function, Patel said. Drethavar stared at the 4th line. His crest plates cycled through 3 distinct configurations, disbelief, alarm, and professional offense, before settling into a rigid neutrality that cost him visible effort to maintain. That conduit is not on any schematic for this station. No, it should not exist. And yet, she traced the fourth line with the spectrometer, following it out of the junction box and along the wall of the maintenance sublevel. Drethavar followed, his datapad recording everything, his mind running through the implications with the rapid precision of an inspector who understood that an undocumented conduit in a regulated junction station was a violation of 7 sections of the Commercial Compliance Code, 3 structural integrity mandates, and the fundamental principle that everything in a Valith station was known, classified, and accounted for. The fourth line ran for 12 meters along the sublevel wall before turning downward through a floor plate that Drethavar's schematic showed as solid structural material. No access point, no junction, no reason for any conduit to pass through it. Patel knelt and ran her fingers along the plate's edge. Modified, the original plate was cut and resealed. Professional work, the weld lines are clean. The surface finish matches the surrounding plates. Someone did this carefully and deliberately. She pried the resealed section open with a tool from her case. Beneath the floor plate, the fourth line continued downward into a space that the station's architectural plans did not acknowledge. A cavity between the maintenance sublevel and the station's outer hull, approximately 1 meter in depth, that should have been filled with structural foam insulation. It was not. The cavity contained equipment. Compact, neatly arranged, connected by a network of thin conduit lines that drew power and thermal energy from the station's documented systems through connections so small and so carefully placed that they had avoided detection through years of standard inspections. Patel lowered herself into the cavity. Drethavar stood at the edge, looking down, his crest plates locked in a configuration he could not classify from his own emotional vocabulary, because the Valith did not, as a rule, have a classification for the feeling of discovering that your entire understanding of your own station was incomplete. Specialist Patel, what is that? I'm not entirely sure yet. She was scanning the equipment with 3 different instruments simultaneously, moving between them with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this before in places she probably was not allowed to discuss. It's drawing minimal power, well below the threshold that would trigger a consumption anomaly in your monitoring system. The thermal output is equally minimal, which is why it took this long for the waste heat coefficient to accumulate enough to trigger NDF. Whatever this is, it was designed to operate beneath your detection floor. Designed to, Drethavar stopped himself. The implication settled over him like a change in atmospheric pressure. Someone deliberately installed undocumented equipment in a Valith administrative junction, tapped into station systems below detection thresholds, and concealed the installation behind modified structural plates. Yes. For what purpose? Patel's spectrometer beeped. She examined the readout, then examined it again, and her expression changed, the focused narrowing humans used when processing information that did not fit their expectations. Inspector Sonn, I need you to come down here. He lowered himself into the cavity, his longer limbs folding awkwardly in the confined space. Patel pointed the spectrometer at the largest piece of equipment, a flat rectangular unit approximately the size of a freight manifest crate, connected to 4 conduit lines and a data cable that disappeared into the wall. This is a signal repeater, she said, a very specific kind. It receives transmissions on one frequency, modulates them, and retransmits on a different frequency. The power draw comes from your grid. The thermal output feeds into your recycling stack, and that data cable goes directly into the station's communications array. Our communications array is monitored. Every transmission is logged and archived. Every transmission on the documented frequency bands is logged. This repeater operates on a band outside your monitoring system's scanning range. It's using your array as an antenna, but on frequencies your system doesn't know to check. Drethavar's datapad trembled in his grip. Not from emotion, his hands were steady. The proximity sensor had picked up the electromagnetic field from the repeater and was vibrating in response, a small haptic alert that felt, in the confined space of the hidden cavity, as if the station itself was shivering at the discovery. Someone is using my station as a relay point for communications the authority cannot detect. That is what the equipment strongly suggests. For how long? Patel examined the conduit connections with careful attention. The insulation on the power tap had developed a thin layer of oxidation consistent with prolonged exposure to the station's atmospheric mix. Based on the material degradation patterns, I would estimate this installation is between 14 and 18 months old. 18 months. The number sat in the air between them with the weight of a verdict that had already been rendered. 18 months of Drethavar's own inspections, quarterly, thorough, compliant with every protocol in the manual, failing to detect equipment that was never supposed to be there, because the protocols had not told him to look for it. The inspection checklist covered documented systems with exhaustive thoroughness. Every item on every checklist was a known component with a known location and a known function. The undocumented equipment existed in the gaps between those items, in the spaces the checklist assumed were empty, because the checklist could not imagine they might not be. I need to report this immediately. Yes, but first we need to understand what it's relaying. If this is passive intelligence gathering, the equipment is evidence, and we need to preserve it intact. If it's an active relay with an operational timeline, we may be on that timeline and running out of room. What do you mean on it? I mean that if whoever installed this equipment is monitoring it remotely, they may already know the NDF tag appeared on your system. They may know a specialist was dispatched. They may know I'm standing in their hidden compartment right now. She looked at the data cable disappearing into the wall, and they may know we found it. The temperature in the cavity did not change, but Drethavar felt something he had not experienced in 23 years of junction administration, the sensation of being inside a situation whose parameters he could not see, whose edges he could not map, and whose rules had been written by someone who was not him. What do you recommend? It was the first time he had asked the human for guidance. He noted this, filed it internally under circumstances requiring pragmatic flexibility, and waited. Patel did not pause to acknowledge the significance of the question. She was already working. I need to tap the data cable and determine what frequencies the repeater is using, what it's relaying, and whether the relay is one-directional or bidirectional. If it's bidirectional, someone on the other end is not only receiving data from this station, they're sending instructions back. She connected a diagnostic interface to the data cable. The device was small, human-manufactured, with a design aesthetic that prioritized function so aggressively that form had apparently not been invited to the design meeting. 40 seconds to handshake with the cable's data stream. Bidirectional, she said immediately. The relay is sending and receiving. Incoming signal on the 447 terahertz band, deep infrared, well outside standard comms monitoring. Outgoing signal on 891 terahertz, near ultraviolet range. 2 different bands, which means the relay isn't simply passing traffic through. It's translating between 2 distinct networks that can't communicate directly. 2 networks. 2 parties. One communicates exclusively in deep infrared, one in near ultraviolet. The relay converts between them. Your station is the translator, inspector. It's been bridging a conversation between 2 unknown entities for the better part of 2 years. Drethavar felt his crest plates flatten against his skull. His junction, His orderly, compliant, thoroughly categorized junction had been converted into a clandestine communications bridge between two unknown parties, operating without authorization and in direct violation of enough administrative codes to fill a tribunal docket from floor to ceiling and halfway across the room. Patel was reading the data stream with focused intensity. The outgoing signal, the near-ultraviolet transmission, is encrypted, but the encryption header matches a known format, terribly commercial encryption, third generation, commonly used by freight brokers in the outer corridor sectors. And the incoming signal. She adjusted the diagnostic interface. Read the output, read it again. I've never seen this encryption format. It's not Valeth, it's not terribly. It's not any of the 11 standard commercial encryption protocols registered with the Corridor Authority. This is something else entirely. She attached a storage module to the interface. I'm capturing 60 seconds of both incoming and outgoing traffic, enough raw data for a full cryptographic analysis if we get the right teams involved. The storage module filled. She disconnected it, secured it in a shielded case, and checked her diagnostic readings one final time. Then the repeater's power draw spiked. The change was fractional, less than 0.5%, but Patel's instruments caught it immediately. A small indicator light on the repeater's casing, previously dark, turned amber. The same amber as the NDF tag on Drethavar's screen, as if the network and the monitoring system were speaking the same warning language. It knows, Patel said quietly. Someone is monitoring the repeater remotely, and they just detected our tap. Drethavar's datapad vibrated, not the proximity sensor this time, an incoming alert from the station's monitoring system. He read it, and something cold settled behind his crest plates and stayed there. The atmospheric recycling stack has registered a second NDF tag. Different location, the power distribution node on Deck 3. Another one. And a third, freight bay thermal regulators. He watched his screen. 3 NDF tags in 90 seconds. Patel was already pulling herself out of the cavity, reaching for her equipment case with the urgent efficiency of someone whose timeline had just been rewritten. They're activating. Whoever controls this relay is triggering something across the network, either covering their tracks or escalating their operation. Are these new readings, or were they present before and below threshold? New. The waste heat coefficients at those locations were well within normal parameters during my check 12 minutes ago. They have risen sharply and suddenly. How fast is the Deck 3 reading climbing? Drethavar checked. The number was visibly increasing as he watched. The Deck 3 coefficient has doubled in the time since you asked the question. A fourth NDF tag appeared on his datapad, crew quarters ventilation system, then a fifth, docking bay thermal regulator, then a sixth, secondary power coupling on Deck 1. They're cascading, Patel said. Each node that activates increases its thermal output, which pushes adjacent readings above the NDF threshold, which triggers new tags, which tells us there are even more nodes than we thought. Every fix we look at reveals 2 more problems underneath. Patel pulled a second tool from her case, something that looked like a modified comms unit with an oversized antenna array. She powered it on and swept it in a wide circle, reading the electromagnetic landscape of the station, as if she were taking the temperature of a patient who had just developed a fever in every limb simultaneously. There are more installations, she said. At least 3 additional electromagnetic signatures consistent with the repeater hardware, 1 directly above us, 2 in the direction of Deck 3. Inspector, this isn't a single device planted by an opportunist. This is a professionally installed network with redundant nodes and coordinated activation protocols. A 7th tag, an 8th. The secondary monitoring console began to emit a low, continuous chime, the sound the system produced when the number of active anomalies exceeded the display's capacity to render them as individual alerts. The sound was designed to be unpleasant. It was succeeding. The network is generating electromagnetic interference with the station's primary communications array, Patel reported, reading her scanner with one hand while pulling tools from her case with the other. The activated nodes are producing broadband noise across multiple frequency bands. Your legitimate comms traffic is being degraded. Signal integrity has dropped to 71% and it's still falling. Drethavar checked. She was right. The station's routine communications, crew traffic, freight coordination, the central reporting channel were all experiencing signal degradation, latency increasing, data packets fragmenting, messages requiring multiple retransmission attempts to reach their destinations. If the interference continues at this rate, I will lose reliable contact with Central within 15 minutes. I think that's the point. Whoever is behind this doesn't want us calling for help while they figure out what to do about us. A ninth NDF tag, and with it a new alert, not an NDF but a standard system warning. The power grid was fluctuating. The cumulative draw from the activated network nodes had crossed above the monitoring threshold. It was no longer hidden. The station's power management system was responding automatically, attempting to compensate by redistributing electrical load across the grid, shifting power from lightly loaded circuits to those under stress. The redistribution is making it worse, Patel said, studying her instruments with the intensity of someone watching a patient deteriorate on the table. Every time the grid shifts load to compensate for the drain, it feeds more power to the nodes in the new load path. The network is parasitic. It consumes whatever power is available in its vicinity. Moving power around the station is like moving food closer to a colony of hungry organisms. You're not solving the problem. You're feeding it. Then I stop the redistribution. That means locking the power grid into its current configuration. No dynamic load balancing. If any system draws more than its allocated share, it trips the local breaker and loses power completely. That includes life support systems on any deck where the breakers are undersized for the current demand. Drethavar pulled up the breaker ratings for every deck on the station. His claws moved across the console with the speed of someone who understood that the time for considered protocol had passed and the time for correct action had arrived. Decks 1 through 3 and 5 through 7 have adequate breaker capacity for current load with redistribution locked. Deck 4 is marginal but should hold. Deck 8, the crew quarters deck, is 12% over the local breaker capacity if redistribution ceases. What happens when Deck 8's breaker trips? Loss of atmospheric processing for the entire deck. 41 crew members lose environmental control. How long from breaker trip to dangerous CO2 levels? Drethavar ran the environmental calculation. 22 minutes to CO2 concentration exceeding safe operational limits. 31 minutes to incapacitation threshold. 39 minutes to conditions incompatible with sustained consciousness. Patel looked at the station schematic on Drethavar's display, then at Drethavar. We need to evacuate Deck 8 before we lock the grid. Every minute we delay the lock, the network draws more power and the interference gets worse. Evacuating a deck requires an administrative order from the junction inspector. That is within my authority. A pause that lasted exactly as long as it took for Drethavar to acknowledge a truth about himself. I have never evacuated a deck. Then you're about to learn. He issued the order. His voice on the station-wide comm carried the flat, measured authority of a Valith inspector delivering an administrative directive, the language precise, the cadence controlled. All personnel assigned to Deck 8 are to proceed immediately to Deck 5 common areas per Emergency Relocation Protocol 14. This is not a drill. Acknowledge and comply. Valith moved quickly and efficiently. Protocol 14 was drilled quarterly, and the crew knew its steps the way they knew the layout of their own workstations. Within 7 minutes, Deck 8 was clear. Drethavar confirmed the headcount on his datapad, 41 personnel, 41 accounted for, and locked the power grid. The effect was immediate. The NDF tags stopped multiplying. The nodes that had already activated held steady at their current power levels but could draw no more. The parasitic growth of the network was contained, not stopped, not solved, but contained. That bought us time, Patel said, but the network is still active, still transmitting through your array, and the interference is still increasing, just more slowly. A new alert. Cossel's voice on the maintenance channel, clipped and professional. Inspector, we have a pressure anomaly in the freight bay atmospheric seal. The seal's monitoring system is showing intermittent fluctuations that don't correlate with any scheduled freight operation. Drethavar checked the freight bay status. The atmospheric seal, the barrier that maintained pressure differential between the pressurized freight processing area and the vacuum of the external docking clamps, was reporting micro-fluctuations in its magnetic containment field. The fluctuations were small, well within safety margins, but they were new and they were growing. Is there a node near the freight bay seal? Patel checked her scanner. Electromagnetic signature consistent with network hardware, approximately 4 meters from the seal's magnetic field generator. The node's activation is producing interference with the seal's control system. If the seal fails, the freight bay depressurizes. We have cargo handlers in there. How many? 12 plus 3 freight inspection officers. Patel's expression tightened. Can you evacuate the freight bay? I can, but the freight bay is the station's primary docking interface. If I close it, no ships can dock or depart. We strand every vessel currently in the corridor approach queue. How many vessels? 7, including a medical transport carrying supplies to Junction Keth 12. The choices multiplied like the NDF tags had. Each solution created a new problem. Each problem demanded a solution that constrained the next decision. Drethavar felt the architecture of his orderly world contracting around him, the familiar categories and protocols shrinking as the situation expanded beyond their boundaries. He evacuated the freight bay. 15 personnel relocated to Deck 3 in 6 minutes. The freight bay sealed, the atmospheric containment stabilized, and 7 vessels in the corridor approach queue received automated hold notices. 3 more problems solved, 3 more problems created. The comms array signal integrity display read 63%, falling. At 50%, outbound transmissions would become unreliable. At 30%, Junction Keth 9 would be effectively cut off from the rest of the Valith administrative network. Drethavar turned to Patel. Tell me what to do next. The words came more easily the second time. Drethavar noted this with the detached observation of someone who was learning, under pressure and in real time, to distinguish between the parts of his professional identity that were useful in a crisis and the parts that were not. His rank was useful. His knowledge of station systems was useful. His instinct to route everything through classification processes designed for known categories of problems was not. I need to get to the comms array junction on Deck 2, Patel said. The data cable from the relay terminates at an unauthorized splice on the main transmitter bus. If I can isolate and sever that splice, I cut the network's access to your antenna without disconnecting the individual nodes. The network stays powered, which avoids triggering any defensive protocols, but it loses its ability to transmit or receive. The organism keeps breathing, but it goes deaf and mute. And the electromagnetic interference. The interference is generated by the node's own electromagnetic output, which is a function of their power consumption, which we've capped by locking the grid. It won't stop until the nodes themselves are powered down. But if I cut the antenna access first, Whoever is on the receiving end of those transmissions loses their situational awareness. They won't know what we're doing inside the station. That gives us operational room. How long to reach the array and make the cut? If you clear me through the security checkpoints, 8 minutes. If I have to wait for authorization at each one, 20. I will walk you through personally. They moved through the station together, Drethavar's longer stride eating the corridors, Patel matching pace with the compact efficiency of a person whose legs were shorter but whose urgency was equal. At the junction of Corridor 3 on Deck 2, a Valith maintenance technician named Kossel stopped them. Kossel had worked under Drethavar's supervision for 14 years. His crest plates showed the mottled gray of confusion mixed with concern. "Inspector, the power grid is locked. Several of my maintenance teams are reporting anomalous conditions, thermal buildup in conduit sections that should be cold, electromagnetic readings on conduit lines that carry no active signal." "What is happening?" Drethavar looked at Kossel. 23 years of administrative training told him to issue a non-disclosure directive and route the inquiry through channels. The last 3 hours of his life told him something different entirely. "There is undocumented equipment installed throughout the station. It has been operating covertly for approximately 18 months. It is now active and interfering with station systems. Specialist Patel and I are working to isolate its communications capability. I need your maintenance teams to report any anomalous thermal readings they encounter, specific locations, specific coefficients. Every data point helps us map the extent of the network." Kossel's crest plates went flat with shock. Then they settled into the configuration Drethavar recognized as professional focus, the expression of a Valith technician who had received a clear task and intended to complete it regardless of how unsettling its context might be. "Understood, Inspector. I will coordinate the reports and relay them to your datapad in real time." "Thank you, Kossel." Patel reached the comms array junction on Deck 2. The unauthorized splice was exactly where her instruments had predicted, concealed beneath a standard access panel that had been removed and resecured with fasteners matching the originals in every measurable dimension. "Same quality as the floor plate modification in the sublevel," Patel observed, examining the splice with a magnifying lens from her case. "Same tooling marks. Same attention to detail. Whoever did this had access to Valith standard equipment, knew how to use it with professional competence, and understood exactly which panels could be removed and resecured without triggering a physical integrity alarm." She selected a cutting tool, a precision instrument with a blade thinner than a human hair, designed for severing data cables without generating electromagnetic discharge that might corrupt the systems on either side of the cut. "I'm going to sever the data cable at the splice point. This will disconnect the network from the antenna. The nodes will still be powered, still generating heat, still producing interference, but they will not be able to transmit or receive. Whoever is on the other end of this conversation is about to hear silence. Do it." She cut the cable, a single, clean severance. The two ends fell apart and Patel immediately sealed each with insulating caps from her case, preventing any signal bleed or accidental reconnection. The effect on Drethavar's datapad was visible within seconds. The comms array signal integrity stopped falling. It stabilized at 51%, degraded but functional, good enough to maintain contact with Central. And then, 20 seconds after the cut, something unexpected happened. The nodes began to power down. One by one, the NDF tags on Drethavar's display shifted from amber to gray. The waste heat coefficients dropped. The electromagnetic interference readings declined. Within 90 seconds, every node in the network had gone dormant. Patel stared at her scanner. They were dependent on the communications link. Without the ability to transmit, the nodes have no operational purpose. They've entered standby. or whoever was on the other end, sent one final instruction before the cable was severed. What instruction? Go dark. We have been discovered. Preserve the network for future reactivation. Patel considered this. Also possible. Either way, the network is dormant, not destroyed. The hardware is intact and could theoretically be reactivated, but inactive. The immediate threat to station operations is neutralized. Drethavar's datapad chimed. COSL reporting 23 anomalous thermal readings from maintenance teams across the station, each one marking a node location. 23. The number was larger than either of them had estimated from the initial survey. File the report, Patel said. Full scope. Drethavar filed it. Every field, every detail, every protocol reference, every timestamp. NDF designation, unauthorized equipment, clandestine communications network, estimated 18-month operational period, bidirectional signal relay, unknown encryption format on the incoming channel, Terrily commercial encryption on the outgoing channel, cascading activation, power grid lock, Deck 8 evacuation, freight bay closure, communications splice severance, 23 confirmed node locations. He flagged it with the highest urgency code the system allowed, priority alpha, immediate response required, and submitted simultaneously to Central, the Corridor Authority, and the Valith Security Directorate. The response came in 4 minutes, not from Central, from the Security Directorate, a voice Drethavar had never heard, speaking with the clipped authority of someone who did not waste time on introductions. Inspector Sonn, Specialist Patel, secure all evidence in place. Do not disconnect or remove any equipment. Do not attempt to power down the dormant nodes. A security team is en route. Estimated arrival, 22 minutes. The network has gone dormant following disconnection from the comms array, Drethavar said. The dormancy may be temporary. Should we take additional measures to prevent reactivation? Negative, preserve the current state. We have been aware of anomalous transmissions on the 891 terahertz band for 11 days. We did not know the relay point. You have identified it. Your actions are noted and appreciated. Maintain position. The channel closed. Patel looked at Drethavar. They knew. The directorate knew something was being relayed through the corridor. They just didn't know where. And the NDF found it. Your classification engine found it. It detected a function it couldn't derive, a source of waste heat that shouldn't exist, and it tagged it. The system did exactly what it was designed to do. It took 18 months. 18 months at a thermal output designed to be invisible. The accumulation was microscopic. Your system caught it when the coefficient crossed its detection threshold, a threshold set by the same engineers who built the classification architecture. They said it correctly. It caught the anomaly. It simply required time. The security team arrived in 19 minutes. 12 operatives in unmarked transit, carrying equipment Drethavar had never seen, speaking in code designations he was not cleared to understand. They went to work in the maintenance sublevel with the focused efficiency of people who had been waiting for exactly this break and intended to extract every particle of intelligence from it. But the investigation immediately revealed that the network was larger and more sophisticated than either Drethavar or Patel had understood from their initial survey. The security team's own scanning equipment, military-grade instruments that operated across frequency ranges Patel's field kit, could not reach, detected an additional layer of the installation that had been completely invisible to civilian sensors. Beneath the primary nodes, embedded in the station's structural framework at a depth that would have required disassembly of load-bearing elements to install, was a secondary data backbone. A hardwired network connecting every node to every other node, independent of the station's own data infrastructure, built from fiber optic cable that produced no electromagnetic signature and generated no waste heat whatsoever. The implications cascaded. The wireless activation signal that had triggered the cascading NDF tags was not the network's primary communication method. It was its emergency backup. The fiber backbone was the main channel, silent and invisible, carrying data between nodes at speeds the security team's analysts described as concerning. The nodes had not merely been relaying signals through the station's antenna. They had been processing data locally, analyzing the traffic that passed through the station's compliance database, extracting specific information according to criteria that were programmed into each node's memory. The security team found the criteria: freight manifests matching certain cargo classifications, transit schedules for vessels registered to 3 specific commercial entities, security patrol routes and rotation times for the Kethri Corridor's enforcement squadron, and most troublingly, the encryption keys used by the Valith Administrative Authority for its own internal communications, captured and stored in a secure partition on each node's memory core. They weren't just listening to our traffic, the team leader told Drethavar. They were reading our encrypted internal communications. Every classified directive that passed through this station's communications array in the last 18 months was captured, decrypted, and relayed to the unknown receiver. One of the analysts called the team leader over to the maintenance sublevel floor. Drethavar and Patel followed. The analyst had removed a section of wall cladding that revealed the fiber backbone's routing path, and what they found there added another dimension to the problem. The fiber line did not simply run between nodes in the most efficient path. It followed the station's own structural conduit channels with perfect precision, routed through junction points that were documented in the station's architectural plans, but used only during original construction. Someone had studied the construction blueprints in detail. Someone had known which channels were empty, which were accessible without disturbing operational systems, and which could be threaded with new cable without leaving visible evidence of entry. These channels were sealed during the station's commissioning phase, Drethavar said, his voice carrying the flat quality of someone stating facts, while their understanding of those facts was being systematically dismantled. They appear in the construction archive but not in the operational database. You would need access to records that were filed before this station became operational. Pre-operational construction records, the team leader said. That narrows the access considerably. To the original construction crew, the commissioning inspectors, and anyone with archive-level clearance at the authority's engineering division. Drethavar paused. That is a very short list. The team leader did not comment on the length of the list. The team leader did not need to. The implication was already doing its work, settling into the spaces between what Drethavar knew and what he was beginning to understand about the scale of what had been hidden inside his station. Drethavar stood at his console and absorbed this. 18 months of classified administrative directives, policy changes, enforcement priorities, personnel assignments, the internal decision-making architecture of the Valith Administrative Authority, laid bare to whoever was on the other end of that signal, whoever sat in the empty coordinates of deep space where the near-ultraviolet beam had been aimed, whoever had built this network with 4 decimal place precision and hidden it in the walls of a station that Drethavar had believed he knew down to the last bolt. How did they obtain our encryption keys? The team leader's expression did not change. That is currently classified as a priority alpha investigation question. The answer may determine whether this was an external intelligence operation or an internal compromise. Internal compromise. The words sat in the air with a weight that made the room feel smaller. Someone inside the authority might have provided the encryption keys. Someone with access to the classified key distribution system. Someone who understood Valith Station architecture well enough to design an installation that perfectly mimicked legitimate infrastructure. Patel, who had been listening from her position at the monitoring station, spoke quietly. The tooling marks on the modified floor plates and access panels are consistent with Valith standard maintenance equipment. The fasteners are Valith specification. The conduit finish matches authority supply chain material. Whoever built this network either had access to your supply chain or went to extraordinary lengths to replicate it. The team leader looked at Patel, then at Drethavar. Inspector Sonn, we will need complete personnel records for every individual who has had maintenance-level access to this station in the past 30 months. Every technician, every contractor, every inspection team member, every supply delivery crew. I can provide those records within the hour. Do so, and Inspector, one additional point. The microfracture that triggered the NDF, the one that exposed this network. Our materials analyst has examined the conduit fitting. The fracture was caused by thermal cycling stress, a natural degradation process that occurs in all conduit materials over time. The rate of degradation is predictable and well documented. Our analyst estimates that the fitting would have fractured at approximately this time, regardless of any external factors. The network's concealment was always going to fail. It was always on a countdown. The only question was whether it would fail before or after the network's operators had completed whatever objective justified 18 months of covert data collection. And have they completed it? We do not yet know. That determination will require analysis of the full data set captured by the storage module specialist Patel recovered, plus the data stored in the node's memory cores. The analysis will take time. What we know now is that the network was operational, it was comprehensive, and its exposure today, by your classification engine and by your decision to call for a specialist, rather than attempting to resolve the NDF through standard channels, has given us the first physical evidence in an investigation that has been running for 11 days without a single concrete lead. Patel stayed. She had not been asked to stay. She stayed anyway, sitting at the secondary monitoring station with her thermos of burned plant liquid, providing real-time spectral analysis of the network's components as the security team cataloged them node by node. Drethavar noticed that the security team's analysts deferred to her spectral readings without question, cross-referencing her data against their own instruments, and occasionally adjusting their own calibration based on discrepancies she identified. She had been doing this work, he realized, for a very long time, longer than his irritation at her presence had allowed him to recognize. Drethavar found himself standing beside her, not supervising, not inspecting, standing, watching his station being methodically disassembled and re-examined by people who understood something he had not, that the things concealed in the gaps between the items on a checklist could be far more significant than the items themselves. 3 hours into the security operation, the team leader, a Valith operative whose designation Drethavar was not cleared to know, approached the monitoring station with a preliminary findings report. Inspector Sonn, the captured signal data has been analyzed. The outgoing signal, Terrily commercial encryption, contains freight routing data, specific cargo manifests, transit schedules, and security patrol patterns for the Kethri corridor. The data is current. It has been continuously exfiltrated from your station's compliance database for the full duration of the network's operation. 18 months of commercial intelligence. Minimum. The incoming signal, the unknown encryption format, has been partially decoded. It contains operational instructions, directives for the network's configuration, power management parameters, and transmission scheduling. The instruction syntax does not match any known species information architecture. Unknown origin. Currently classified as such. Analysis is ongoing. However, the operative paused, and a Valith security operative pausing was, in Drethavar's experience, an event roughly as common as a comet impact on a populated world. Inspector, the network's power management protocols were extraordinarily sophisticated. Each node drew power at a rate precisely calculated to remain below your monitoring threshold, and those rates were adjusted dynamically, in real time, in response to changes in station power consumption. When your station's load increased, the network drew proportionally more. When it decreased, the network drew less. The ratio was maintained to a precision of 4 decimal places. It was actively monitoring our power consumption and adjusting its own draw to match. Continuously. The NDF was triggered not because the network's concealment failed in any systematic way, but because one of its thermal dissipation pathways developed a microfracture in a conduit fitting, a hairline crack. The fracture reduced dissipation efficiency by 0.0019%. That was enough to push the waste heat coefficient above the NDF threshold. A microfracture. A hairline crack in a fitting on a hidden conduit, invisible to the naked eye, altering a thermal pathway by less than 0.002%. That single point of material failure in a network designed to be perfect was enough. That minuscule imperfection, that one concession to the fundamental reality that nothing physical is truly flawless, was sufficient for the classification engine to detect the anomaly that 18 months of deliberate, sophisticated, 4 decimal place concealment had hidden. Drethavar looked at the NDF tag still displayed on his secondary screen. 3 characters, generated by a system that did not care how small the anomaly was, or how carefully it had been hidden, or how sophisticated its creators were. The system cared only whether the reading could be traced to a known source. When it could not, the system spoke. 3 characters in the typeface reserved for the impossible. Enough. The total node count, when the security team completed their full sweep. 14 primary nodes, 9 secondary relay points, and 4 microtaps on data lines that didn't carry enough power to generate detectable waste heat on their own. 27 pieces of undocumented equipment in a station Drethavar had inspected 71 times without finding a single one. Patel packed her equipment case as the security team wrapped their documentation. The station's power grid had been unlocked, Deck 8 repopulated, the comms array restored to full function with the unauthorized splice removed, and the transmitter bus recertified clean. The dormant nodes remained in place, preserved as evidence, their power taps disconnected and their data cables severed at both ends. In his formal incident report, 712 fields completed in their entirety without abbreviation, Drethavar included a recommendation. Section 12, Field 447, suggested protocol amendment. He wrote, "Current inspection protocols cover documented systems comprehensively, but do not include procedures for detecting undocumented systems operating below standard monitoring thresholds. Recommend implementation of a secondary inspection layer focused on anomalous thermal signatures, power consumption microvariances, and electromagnetic emissions in non-standard frequency bands. Recommend this secondary layer be designed in mandatory consultation with human anomaly specialists, whose diagnostic methodology prioritizes following unknown readings to their physical source, rather than routing them through classification processes optimized for known categories of problems." The distinction between these two approaches is not academic. It is the difference between finding the problem and filing a report about not having found it. Field 312, Assessment of Specialist Performance. He wrote exemplary. Specialist Patel's diagnostic methodology was decisive, precise, and directly responsible for the identification of a clandestine communications network comprising 27 undocumented components. Her willingness to pursue the anomalous reading to its physical source, rather than accepting the classification system's inability to categorize it, prevented the loss of critical evidence and enabled the preservation of the intact network for security analysis. Her field decision to sever the communication splice, rather than attempting to power down individual nodes, demonstrated an understanding of network interdependency that the inspector did not possess, and could not have developed through standard Valeth training protocols. Inspector's recommendation: retain Specialist Patel on permanent priority dispatch for Junction Keth 9 and adjacent stations within the Kethri corridor. Field 671, additional notes. His claws hovered over the console. 23 years of reports, and he had never used this field for anything beyond technical annotations and cross-references to other filings. He wrote, the reading was 0.0073. The tag was NDF, Non-Derivable Function, 3 characters generated by a classification engine that does not forgive, does not forget, and does not care how carefully an anomaly has been hidden. A clandestine network designed to be invisible, maintained by unknown actors of unknown origin, operating at a precision of 4 decimal places, was defeated by a microfracture in a conduit fitting that altered thermal dissipation by 0.0019%. The system caught that 0.0019% with the same certainty it would have applied to a hull breach or a reactor alarm. The universe hides things in the margins of our certainty. The system catches them if the thresholds are set honestly. The human follows them to their source if permitted to work without unnecessary obstruction. The inspector's role, I have learned today, is to ensure both of these things happen, and to recognize that following the letter of a process designed for known problems can become the primary obstacle when the problem is unknown. This inspector will not require the lesson twice. He signed the report, filed it. Patel was on the shuttle ramp, equipment case in one hand, thermos in the other, the posture of someone who had done good work and knew it without needing to be told. Specialist Patel. Inspector, your performance assessment has been filed. Exemplary rating. Thank you. I have also filed a protocol amendment recommendation, suggesting that future inspections include a mandatory secondary layer designed in consultation with human anomaly specialists. The corners of her mouth shifted by a fraction, the human expression for something that was genuinely amusing, but that the person had chosen not to laugh about openly. That is remarkably forward-thinking of you, Inspector. It is pragmatic. Today's outcome was the result of your methodology applied to my station's data. The combination was substantially more effective than either approach would have been alone. I do not particularly enjoy acknowledging this. I know. She stepped onto the shuttle ramp, paused, turned back. Inspector Sonn. The waste heat coefficient, 0.0073. Your classification engine flagged it because the NDF threshold is set at the absolute edge of its detection capability. The engineers who calibrated that threshold chose to make the system sensitive to the smallest possible anomaly, even though it meant generating flags for readings that most inspectors in most circumstances would dismiss as sensor noise or environmental fluctuation. I did not dismiss it. No, you did not. You called Central. You requested a specialist. You issued an authorization code you did not want to issue to a person you had every institutional reason not to trust, because the reading was there, and you respected the system enough to follow its determination, even when it led somewhere you did not want to go. That is the part that mattered, Inspector. The system only works if someone works it. Drethavar's crest plate settled into a configuration he did not immediately recognize. After several seconds of internal review, he identified it as the expression the Valeth used for a compliment received from an unexpected and previously undervalued source, an expression so rarely needed in administrative circles that most Valeth never learned its formal designation. The system worked, he said. The system worked because you worked it, and because someone, a very long time ago, set the threshold at exactly the right level to catch a reading of 0.0073 with a 3-character tag that should not exist. She went through the shuttle door. It closed. The shuttle detached from the docking clamp and pulled away into the corridor dark. Drethavar stood in the docking bay of Junction Keth 9 and watched the shuttle's running lights diminish until they were indistinguishable from the background stars. Then he returned to his console, opened the next scheduled compliance audit, and began to read it the way he had never read one before, not just the items on the checklist, but the spaces between them, where the things that did not fit might be waiting for someone who was willing to look. The NDF expansion glowed softly on his secondary screen. Non-Derivable Function, 3 characters, the smallest possible signal from the edge of what a system built to know everything could admit it did not know. And enough, in the hands of a system that refused to ignore what it could not explain, and 2 people who learned, under pressure neither had anticipated, that the answer was always worth finding together, to change everything about how one station and one inspector would look at the space between the known and the unknown for the rest of his career.